Hello, my dear friends. You're on the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of November of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Russian Federation. During the previous 24 hours, probably the most important updates came exactly from this area. Today the President of the Russian Federation held a briefing with members of the Security Council. The meeting began with a discussion of the US intentions to resume nuclear weapons testing. Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov, Director of the Foreign Intelligence Service Sergei Naryshkin, Secretary of the Security Council Sergei Shoigu, and Director of the Federal Security Service Alexander Bortnikov commented on the matter. So let's discuss the statements that were made by the Minister of Defense because they are probably the most interesting. Belousov proposed immediate preparations for nuclear tests on Novaya Zemlya. Other statements, most importantly, Trump's actions indicate Washington is building up its strategic offensive weapons. The US possible refusal to monitor nuclear tests could be a logical step by Washington to undermine the system of global strategic stability. The US is increasing its strategic offensive weapons. The US is working on developing an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead with a range of 13,000 kilometers. A new B-21 bomber and cruise missile are being developed. The Americans have begun implementing the Golden Dome program, which provides for the interception and pre-launch destruction of Russian and Chinese ballistic missiles. The United States regularly conducts strategic offensive force exercises. The most recent, involving simulated strikes against Russia, took place in October. We must maintain Russia's nuclear potential in readiness to inflict damage. So these are the statements of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Belousov. And right after these statements, the President of the Russian Federation emphasized that in this regard, I instruct the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the special services, and the relevant civilian agencies to do everything possible to gather additional information on this issue, analyze it in the Security Council, and submit coordinated proposals on the possible commencement of work on preparing for nuclear weapon tests. So it seems we are entering completely different stage, completely different era, and most likely these nuclear tests are going to happen in the future, and Russia, the United States of America, and China, everybody will do them. So the world and the situation in the world escalated once again. So of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but I hope that everything is going to be okay. Now let's return back to Ukraine and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the northeastern part of Kharkiv region. During the previous 24 hours, the most important updates are coming from this area. So once again, I would like to remind you that several days ago, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, made a very important statement about the situation on the ground. Zelensky stated that the Russians, there are just 50 Russians on the territory, or 60 Russians on the territory of Kupiansk, and the city clearance operation is in the progress. Furthermore, he stated that a clearance operation is underway in Kupiansk. We will clear everything. The dates are set. We won't speak about them for now. So this is not just a statement made by Zelensky. You need to understand that, first of all, this is something like a public order to commanders of the Kharkiv direction. So Zelensky, with these statements, told the commanders of the Kharkiv region and Kharkiv frontline to begin offensive operation and to force the Russians to fall back from the western part of the city of Kupiansk. And this is not just an order. If Zelensky made this statement, this means that he is confident that everything would be achieved by the armed forces of Ukraine. So that is why the Ukrainian commanders in this area have no other option but to complete this task, and most likely in coming days we're going to see a lot of attempts to attack from Ukrainian side with probably dozens of vehicles and hundreds of soldiers, just with one purpose: to force the Russians to fall back from the western bank of the river of Askolon, from the western bank of the city of Kupiansk. Of course, the Russians are ready for this, the Russians are prepared for this, and the Russians will try to do everything they can with the purpose to repel these attacks and to save control of the western Kupiansk. And right after this battle, very likely that somebody in Ukrainian military authorities will lose his position. At the same time, and due to the critical situation around the city of Kupiansk, the Russians intensified their offensive operations in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region and in the area of the city of Volchansk. During the previous 24 hours, lots of huge changes were recorded on the territory of the northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast. So this is the situation by the end of the 3rd of November of 2025, and this is approximately the moment when Russians launched their major offensive operation. During the first 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly around the settlement by the name of Dvorechenskaya, and by the end of the 5th of November of 2025, the Russians managed to cut the settlement of Dvorechenskaya in Kolder and to cut the main logistic lines. So as you can see, there is just one road between the settlement of Kolodezne and the village of Dvorechenskaya, and now, according to different mappers, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to cut this road physically, which means that Ukrainians, most likely in coming days or maybe during this upcoming week, will be forced to fall back from this area along through these fields and these tree lines in the direction of Kolodezne. But at the same time, we see that the Russians are advancing in the direction of this possible road evacuation with the purpose to cut this area physically and to create a cauldron. So most likely in coming days, the front line in this area will collapse, and most likely the Russians will begin their major offensive operation. They will start something similar that we used to see in the Zaporozhye direction in September, October, and probably in August. The Russians will try to maintain the lines, and they will try to probably establish complete control over everything along this red line, which means that the Russians can force the Ukrainians to bring additional reinforcements and reserves in this area for stabilization of the situation. Of course, this Russian offensive operation can ruin Ukrainian plans to counterattack to the west of the river Voskol. But these are not the only updates from this territory. Probably the most important updates are coming from the city of Volchansk. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. This information was confirmed by neutral mappers and by pro-Russian sources. And right before we started making this video, another, let's say, episode was published by pro-Russian sources. In this video, we can see how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the most southern part of the settlement, and later pro-Russian sources published 3 videos from the most southern part of the city of Volchansk. In this video, we can see how a Russian soldier raised the Russian flag, probably on the territory of the Volchansk citadel. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, this is not the only video published from this area. In this video, we can see how Russian soldiers were clearing the Volchansk citadel. We can see a close combat between Russians and Ukrainians, how the Russians were securing the territory. So based on these 3 videos and based on the reports published by different sources, we adjusted this territory. Now it's very simple and very clear that Russians will continue advancing further with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Vilcha from the northeast. We expect that Russians will attack in the same direction through the settlement of Sinelnikova, and of course Russians will continue offensive operation in the northeastern parts along the river of Volcha with the purpose to probably capture everything along the border. So this is the situation in this region, and due to these problems for Ukrainians and for Ukraine in the area of Volchansk and along the border, it's very difficult to believe that Ukrainians are able to carry out something very successful to the west of the river Voskol. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but one thing is clear, that obviously we are about to see the Kharkiv northeastern meat grinder. Now let's talk about the central Kupiansk direction. We have received some updates from this territory. We haven't been receiving anything from this area for a very long period of time, but yesterday pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions on the Barova direction. And based on the report that was published yesterday by pro-Ukrainian sources, we adjusted the map. And by the end of the 5th of November of 2025, few more neutral mappers and sources clarified the situation on the ground, and according to all these updates, we can see that the Russians either launched another major offensive operation, and this time in the direction of the settlement of Barova itself. Maybe the Russians began their major Barova offensive operation, or it's just another attempt to probably force Ukrainians to keep reserves in this area of a 3rd Azov assault brigade or something like this. Anyway, the situation escalates in this area as well, and most likely in coming days we might see lots of updates from this territory. Of course, the Russians will try to do everything they can with the purpose to ruin Ukrainian plans to counterattack to the west, in the western part of the city of Kupiansk, and they will try to do everything possible. Now let's talk about the situation in the city of Konstantinovka. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. The Russians continue outflanking maneuver around the settlement of Ivana Polya. During the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions and the Russians captured this dense network of the fortifications. This information was provided by neutral mappers. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of important things happened. Let's discuss everything in details. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, both the Russians and the Ukrainians improved their positions. The Russians improved their positions along the Pokrovsk agglomeration perimeter, and the Ukrainians improved their positions around the Shakhovo pocket. So let's discuss everything in details. According to different updates, the Russians improved their positions mainly in the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk. So these are the changes in the northwestern part. This is the situation by the end of the 4th of November, and this is the situation by the end of the 5th of November. The Russians are advancing and the Russians are trying to answer the settlement of Grishina. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to attack and to shorten the distance to the Olympiyskaya Street from the south, but for these purposes the Russians need to cross these rivers and these water reservoirs and to capture this territory. And this is the main foothold of the Ukrainians in this region. Exactly from this territory, the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack Russians with the purpose to unblock the encirclement. So that is why the clashes for this territory are going to be very difficult. But if Russians can capture these territories, then Ukrainians will lose any chance for evacuation and for breakthrough. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions in the northeastern part of the settlement, as we discussed in the previous video. For exactly from this area, the Russians captured their first prisoner of war in the area of the gas station. Furthermore, the Russians managed to tighten the news around positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the northeastern Pokrovsk citadel. So this is the situation by the end of the 4th of November, and this is the situation by the end of the 5th of November. Most likely during the upcoming night, Ukrainians either will fall back from this territory or they will surrender because they are getting more and more exhausted during the battles with Russians. As for the city of Mirnograd, as you can see, the Russians are not in a hurry, and the city of Mirnograd is not something like a task for Russians. The Russians are planning to use the city of Mirnograd as a hub for Ukrainians. They will try to force Ukrainians from the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration to retreat towards the city of Mirnograd. Then the Russians will blockade them inside of this area, and then Russians will start negotiations. And they will, of course, the Russians will provide, let's say, an option for Ukrainians to surrender. And telling the truth, we believe that this is exactly what is going to happen. But the only problem that the Russians might face in the future is if Ukrainians will be able to improve their positions further around the Shakhovo pocket. And during the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, according to pro-Ukrainian sources and according to neutral mappers, as a result of counter-offensive operation, the armored forces of Ukraine managed to improve their positions, and the Ukrainians managed almost to release and almost to probably secure the road between the settlements of Nova Shakhovo and Shakhovo. So we believe that in coming days, Ukrainians will continue counter-offensive, and with this counterattacks, Ukrainians most likely will be able to unblock the settlement of Shakhovo. And right exactly from this very moment, the most interesting part of the battle for the city of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd will start, because as soon as Ukrainians are able to restore these roads and these lines, they will be able to begin another wave of offensive operation, and this time with the purpose to recapture completely the territories between the villages and settlements of Rodinska, Novoekonomichna, Vladimirovka, and Novotoretska. And if Ukrainians are able to counterattack here successfully, of course, this can lead to probably unblocking of Ukrainians, releasing of Ukrainians from the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So the most important and the decisive part is ahead of us. Most likely during the next 2-3 weeks, everything will be resolved. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, the sources reported that Russians continue their offensive operation, and several sources familiar with the situation on the ground reported that in coming days the Russians may report about the situation in Spenovka and the situation in few more villages in this area. It seems that during the next several days the Russians will publish another video with raised flags across the entire Zaporozhye direction. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.